So welcome to my episode on how Final Fantasy changed me. And I'm going to go through all of the Final Fantasy games that I played, the main series, and talk about how I have changed with the Final Fantasy games and how they have changed. You can look at it as a series review, but realistically, it's how I've had to change with the series and how the series has changed me. I will ask you guys, has Final Fantasy changed for you? How has it changed for you? Is it better now? Is it worse? This is a huge topic, and this is going to be a fascinating little journey for me to go on. Maybe a little bit therapeutic in a lot of ways as well.
Let's get this done.
Okay, let's go back to the early 90s, and we'll start right at the beginning. And the beginning is very, very simple. When Final Fantasy, the very first one, came out, this was awesome. On the NES, I played it and I was like, this is the best role-playing game on the system. The final one, which was the first one. And so I really enjoyed this game. I liked the combat. I liked the overhead graphics and everything. And it was in a time when next generation systems were coming out, but this still held its own. And why this is important is because it's the first one. It's the first time we heard the word Final Fantasy, those words together, and we're like, oh my gosh, what is this? And so Final Fantasy was born at that point, and I liked it, but I thought, maybe that's it. We'll never see anything else like it again. Okay, Final Fantasy II came out, which is Final Fantasy IV in Japan. Yes, it's my cruddy box here. Here it is. This was a big deal because it was on the Super Nintendo. And we all had Super Nintendos. We were all big RPG fans back then. And we were starved for RPGs. So when we heard that Squaresoft was bringing Final Fantasy, a second one, to the Super Nintendo, it was a must-buy day one. And I want to go on record as saying this is one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. The pixel artwork, everything looked updated from the NES. So visually, we're getting better. But also the gameplay was better. The summons were in there and all that. And you have to understand that we hadn't played 2 and 3, the original 2 and 3 that were in Japan. We wouldn't get those till years later. So for us, this was amazing. This was doing huge leaps and bounds of innovations. And we loved it. I loved it. Then this happened. This is one of the biggest games on the Super Nintendo for hype, for delivery, and success. And that is Final Fantasy III, also known as Final Fantasy VI in Japan. This was the swan song of the Super Nintendo to me, personally. I was waiting for this game to come out for, it felt like years. I think it was years. And finally the game came out. I got to play it. And I want to say that it's absolutely incredible. It's, pixelated graphics, perfection with that. They solidified it. It doesn't get much better than this. The soundtrack was elevated. And I gotta say, the soundtracks in the other games were all going like this. When it got to 3, went through the roof. Gameplay-wise, doing some of the input commands that you would do, some of the bosses. I can't state enough. It wasn't just detailed graphics. It was a detailed world and a detailed story and detailed characters. This knocked it out of the park, and this is a very important bit into my story, is that this is when Final Fantasy was about to change. Because at this point, we're on the NES, we're on the Super Nintendo twice, and with this game, everybody's happy. Or are they? I was happy. I was pretty good with all of that. And then the strangest thing in the world, Squaresoft went to Sony. And we got Final Fantasy VII. This is a big deal. Multiple discs on CD-ROM. Great orchestrated soundtrack, which is legendary. Even all these years later, everybody will quote Final Fantasy VII as having an iconic soundtrack. We'd gone into polygon battles. It was 3D cinemas. It was insanity. All of a sudden, we had gone from Super Nintendo to this, and it was remarkable. But the fan base had kind of split a little bit. there was people like me that were like, yes, I'm willing to change. And I changed. I was like, yeah, I'm not just going to be like some Nintendo guy going, oh no, Final Fantasy's not Nintendo anymore. I'm not going to get it. I got it. And I became a big Sony fan as well at that point. And you know what? I love pixelated graphics more than anybody, but I felt like I had my due. I felt like I had my beautiful time on the Super Nintendo. I was okay with that. And then I was ready for next generation RPGs like what this was delivering. So I went with it. Very, very impressed. Still to this day, an incredible game that's still, I think, way ahead of its time. It also did something kind of unique. Here's the thing. It went into kind of like cyberpunk world. We had like a bit more sci-fi. Yes, in Final Fantasy III, we had the steampunk elements, but in this, all of a sudden, we were getting a little bit more cyberpunk, and I was really cool with that. I thought that was great. Okay, here's the bit where I got a little bit puzzled. When Final Fantasy VIII came out, here on the PlayStation, once again, a hyped game. Oh yeah, very hyped. Was it doing what Final Fantasy VII was doing? Yes. And we were all excited about that, and we're totally okay with it. Cinematics look good. The characters were your characters were normal size. I had Reggie on the show and we were talking about that. We were blown away that the characters were normal size on the screen. So that was going on. But here's the thing. This one kind of weirded me out. And I really like this game, I want to say that. But it weirded me out. I was kind of going with the journey and I'm like, oh, we're kind of doing a bit of cyberpunk elements again, a little bit more sci-fi once again. And I was kind of weirded out by it, going, is this a trend now? Is this Final Fantasy sci-fi? And so, again, this is where I had to change. I kind of went with it. And I really enjoyed it. Yes, the drawing magic became a bit of a controversy. And the audience, once again, was split. Some people did not like the draw magic. Some people really enjoyed the story. Some people didn't like the love elements of it. I liked all of those things. So Final Fantasy VIII was a win for me. And then, I believe everybody was united again with Final Fantasy IX, where it was a return to medieval, return to chibi-style characters. And I mean, the love characters and the world setting and the storyline, something out of a Disney film from back then. Humorous. Wonderful game. Wonderful game. So again, I felt very at home. I felt like, hey, I know exactly where I'm at. And then the PlayStation 2 is announced. And another little game, Final Fantasy X, was announced for it, for the PS2. I think for most of us back then, it was one of our most hyped games ever. All the Final Fantasy games were really big and hyped, right? So this is a massive game. It's like, oh my god, Final Fantasy X. And here's the thing, I've done multiple videos on this. This was a strange one for me because it had the graphics. It had a very weird storyline that weirded me out. The characters were very weird at times. The world setting was strange. We didn't have a world map anymore, which kind of was weird to me. In looking back now, this is classic Final Fantasy, but I didn't think so at the time. I thought that there was a little bit too much cinematics, and I wanted a bit more gameplay. I felt like I was doing a bit of gameplay, but then we were going to cinemas and movies a lot more than we'd ever done before. And I was like, I don't know, man. I mean, are they getting away from the gameplay in the world? I liked, having the world map. Instead of, this was dots on a map, and I'm like, okay, that's the thing. And at that time, I look back now with very nostalgic glasses, and I think, because we have turn-based in this, so I'm really, really come back to it and really enjoy this. But at the time, I didn't particularly love it. And I started to kind of feel a bit off with Final Fantasy. And then I'm bringing this one in. I know it's a bit of a side game, and I've never talked about it on the channel, and I have no idea why. And that is Final Fantasy X-2 X2. This was an external game, kind of a side adventure with Yuna and her friends, and a lot of dressing up as different characters. That's their powers. You get dressed up in different outfits and things like that. I have something to admit. This is a weird game too, like Final Fantasy X was weird. But I loved it. And this is one that I was like secretly in love with, and even my friends were like, why do you really like that game so much? I'm like, I don't know. Do you know what? I wasn't working at the time. I had a lot of time on my hands. And I picked this game up and I finished it within a week. And I loved it. I loved the whole dress-up mechanics of it and the over-the-top of it. I thought it was a lot of fun and I enjoyed it, but it was weird. It was strange. And I was wondering if Final Fantasy was becoming more about the movies and the Flash rather than the gameplay. There was a bit to enjoy there, but we're still getting away from that.
This is a little embarrassing.
Here's the thing, as I was kind of getting weirded out by all of that, I got blindsided by Final Fantasy XI Online, and I've told the story many times, and I'm not going to go through it all again. This completely was the best thing to happen to my life and the worst thing to happen to my life all in one, that I absolutely got addicted to playing this online. And this was a whole different beast. And this is different than the rest of the journey with Final Fantasy. This just kind of ruined my life for a little bit. And I got off it. I got back to the real world. And yes, for 14 in the future, I would never play another online Final Fantasy game again. I think that was a smart move for me because I got way too addicted to it. Okay, get that out of the way. Next up, on the PS2, once again, here's where things really, really get strange. Final Fantasy XII is announced. The hype again is very high. Everybody jumps in. Some people were like, wait a second, some of these characters, some of the guy characters are not wearing a lot of clothing. I didn't really even take that in. I didn't really think about that at all. I was all about where are we going with this storyline, and the storyline was epic. This is what I call like the Star Wars of the Final Fantasy series. It really felt like they were going that direction and all that. A bunch of the characters, the way that they were. This is where it gets weird for me. This is where I start to kind of go, whoa. This is the part where Final Fantasy starts to change me. I remember talking to my friend Andrew on the phone, and he's like, yeah, you have macros you set up for characters and for combat now. And I was like, oh, that's really, really weird. They're kind of changing Final Fantasy. It's almost like they got influenced by Final Fantasy XI. This one feels like you're playing an MMO. So when you launch your characters in, you're sending string commands to them all. Like, here, like, the commands are already laid in. Do your attacks. They're already programmed in the way you want them to go out. And it was weird. And I tried to play this game twice, 25 each time. And then me and Kim sat down and finally played the remastered version and finished it. And my opinion on it changed, but it's still a weird Final Fantasy, but my opinion of it is really high. But I was kind of like, man, I felt like we were getting away from Final Fantasy. You know, I guess I'm going to get into the real reasons of that why soon.
Yeah!
This is the straw that broke the camel's back with me. You saw how it's kind of getting a bit strange. Final Fantasy XIII. And I want to say I have quite a few friends of mine that like this game quite a bit. And I have quite a few friends of mine that don't like this game. I unfortunately fit into that. I don't like this game too much. And I want to say the graphics are outstanding. The music is really good. Love the character designs. Love Lightning. Really like all of that stuff. For me, it just, again, was getting so far away from what made Final Fantasy, great for me. Having a great world map, having towns to visit. Now, we didn't have towns to visit. We had kiosks that you could go up and, interact with and buy weapons through that. The world map itself was just not there. I was like, what's going on? Great example. I have here my Final Fantasy XIII strategy guide. I always used to buy strategy guides with my Final Fantasy games. Here is one of the first dungeons that you go through. I'm going to bring this right up to the camera. You see this line right here? See that line right there? This is the dungeons. A lot of the dungeons in Final Fantasy XIII. All of a sudden, the game had become so linear that I couldn't even believe it. I felt like I had no sense of exploration. And exploration was go down a line, you can kind of go veer off to the right a little bit. Yes, the game opens up a little bit more at the end, but overall, I was completely upset about this game, and I still am. And I really want to revisit it one day and give it more. give it more of my time. I gave it a lot of time. But, you know, Final Fantasy XIII was the one that kind of made me go, I don't know where I'm at with Final Fantasy anymore. And yes, we had the next, 13 in the series, 13-2 and all that. I didn't even play those. I was so done. And I know, that's a strange thing. Look at me. As a Final Fantasy fan, the journey that I went on, 13 was the combo breaker for me. It was. And I get no pleasure out of that. No pleasure. Okay, 14 came out, an online game. No, I stayed away from it. I played a bit of the demo and I was like, yeah. No. I could get addicted to this. And I have a lot of friends that are very, very addicted to it. And I'm secretly jealous. I know that it's a game that I would love, but you guys would never see me again. I wouldn't even be here and all that. Okay, here's where I had to change for Final Fantasy. I had to change. And that is for Final Fantasy 15. There was a huge amount of hype for this. I was very, very excited to play this on PS4. I was like, here we go. And this is another game that split audiences all over the place. Split the fan base all over the place. What did I think of the game? I reviewed it at the time and I said this. I liked it. I enjoyed it and I finished the game. And then I moved on with my life. The characters were weird. The leather-bound guys driving around in an old-fashioned car through the desert, jumping out, fighting monsters. It was weird. A lot of the open world was very cool, but very kind of empty in a lot of ways. And sometimes I felt like I just kind of ran through the game a lot. But I did enjoy it. And here's the thing. The action combat. No more turn-based. It was all about action combat now. Pseudo turn-based. A lot of people hated it. And I knew this is when I had to change. Either, for myself personally, I'm not talking for you. Either I was going to get with the action combat, or I wouldn't be playing Final Fantasy games anymore. And you saw my history with them. How could I not play Final Fantasy anymore? So I kind of bit my lip and just went with the action combat, knowing that they changed it and this is the way it was going to be and all of that. And I kind of went with the storyline, and I'm telling you, I can't even remember the storyline now, but it's just one of those things that I went through, but yet it felt so un-Final Fantasy to me. Some of the music wasn't quite there the same. And I'm not saying the music in any of these games is bad. It just felt a little bit off. It didn't feel like the older Final Fantasies. And I think that's a product of its design. It's getting further away from what created it. And it's becoming something else. It's Final Fantasy by name, but sometimes not Final Fantasy by nature. And that's the thing I've had to wrap my head around over the years. I've really had a hard time with it. And then we got into the latest game, which I just played recently, Final Fantasy 16. I finished the game in a week. And I said, I enjoyed it. And I did. Is it a big Final Fantasy game? Yeah. Is there a lot to do? Absolutely. Is the combat fast and kinetic? Yeah. Is it interesting? Sure. Cool bosses? Absolutely. Interesting storyline? Sure. But it's funny when I look at the game now. I've had a little bit of time away. It's a great RPG. There's so much to it. But it feels very un-Final Fantasy. And that's the thing. This is why I want to make the video. I want to come on the journey myself to figure it out. What makes it so un-Final Fantasy? There's characters, monsters in there from past Final Fantasy games. Some music cues at times. I don't know. I think it's become so modernized and gotten so far away from the source material, if you want to call it that it is its own thing. It's its own Final Fantasy, and all the Final Fantasy games are different. But it's weird how much they've changed, and they've gotten away from the source material. That's what I'm saying anyways. You guys can harp in at any point and say what you think is the main thing that has changed in Final Fantasy. It's a fascinating thing to think about, especially when you're a fan, like you guys, like I am, and all of that. And yes, with Final Fantasy 13, 15, 16, I just kind of went with it. I've gone with it. And do I hate the games? No. Do I like the games? Yeah. 13, not so much so. But it's weird how much Final Fantasy's changed. And I've been wrapping my head around it for a long time. Especially going into reviewing 15 and 16. It was really like, where am I at? Do you know what I am? I'm a fan that wants to enjoy these games. It's kind of like Star Wars. Star Wars has been an up and down ride for many people. And I feel it's the same ride as Final Fantasy, that every thing that comes out, I want to enjoy it for being a fan, because I started right at the beginning with all the beginning games, and these games were my childhood as much as Star Wars was my childhood. So I'm always trying to enjoy it. And then, and I'm there going, hey, I'm trying to enjoy this. And there's so many people going, I hate this and I don't like this. And they have every right to say that. And I have every right to try to say, I'm trying to enjoy Final Fantasy. I'm trying to enjoy it. Final Fantasy's been an escape for me, and I want to continue to escape into it, not away from it. I don't want to quit Final Fantasy, So I hope that in the future, they are able to figure out what Final Fantasy is. I feel that I know. I feel it's chocobos. I feel when battles end, we hear the wind music. A little bit of charm, a little bit of humor. And I think Final Fantasy 16 was lacking in humor. When I look back on that game, very serious. And I think it needed a little bit more humor there to take it through and all of that. What do you guys think? That's my journey. Do you see? I'm not joking. I had to change with Final Fantasy. It was a real video. It was a real thing I had to do. And I really wanted to come in and make it and talk to you guys about it. So I will ask you guys, how has Final Fantasy changed for you? Is it better? Is it worse? Let me know. Is it better now than it was in the past? Am I somebody who's just caught in the past in a lot of ways? I don't know. I kind of grown with them all during the years. That is for sure. So guys, let me know what you think. So anyways, guys, until next time.